now. Thank you.
Okay, great. All right. Let me go ahead and share my screen. All right. Good morning. My name's Jacob, and I'm going to be taking you through the developers webinar today. First of all, a little bit of housekeeping. Right now, we're in the process of planning all of our topics for 2021. So if you have any suggestions for that, please don't hesitate to reach out. Any suggestions would be greatly appreciated. And as Monica mentioned, I'll be talking today about working with files in Limfinity. And for this purpose, I prepared a little demo instance running in Limfinity version 7.6 that we're going to go through all of the examples in. Several of them involve code, and I'll pause and explain the code. And obviously, you'll have a copy of the recording, so you can go back and review the examples if you need to draw from any of them. All right, with that said, let's jump into the demo instance. Okay, everybody should be seeing Limfinity now. I'm going to go ahead and start off with the very basics of a file UDF in Limfinity. I've got this patient subject type, and it's got a couple of fields, one of which is chart file, which is of the file type. File can be found under Advanced File. The reason I'm showing this, this works totally out of the box, no code required. You have the ability to, create a patient and attach a file right here, drag and drop. Everything works just fine. No code actually involved in this example at all. Same with edit. You can see the file right here. You can replace it with a different file. All of that works just fine. You notice the file changed. No code involved in that example either. But we can move on to some more interesting examples that actually involve code. For instance, I've now showed you how to upload a single file to a single UDF. But a lot of times when you're working with files, you need the ability to attach any number of them, only limited by the user's capacity to upload files and the database size. So in order to do that, first let me show how it works. Click this button. I get this nice little file pane that lets me attach any number of files. So I'll just go ahead and attach both of those. Enter some comments. Click OK. And you'll notice these patient attachments get created with the files that I just uploaded. How does this actually work? Well, anytime you're doing this, you're going to need an auxiliary subject type. We don't have the ability to store multiple files in a single UDF. So the way we get around that is by using a subject type to store the files. So I have this subject type patient attachment, and it's got a patient, an attachment file, and the comments that go along with the file. All right, now let me show how the actual code works for this. First of all, the before script actually shows that nice little form where you can upload the files. The way this is done is by using a custom X type called uploader. It is not used for any real UDFs because, like I said, there's not any UDFs that have multiple files as values. But as long as you're able to process them in the after script, you can use it in the before script. This example is pretty canned. You can basically just take this and go. I'm going to zoom in a little bit too when we're talking about these. All right, and then in the after script, kind of same deal. We have the ability to parse those files using a common method that you can use and iterate through them. And then for each file, we're just creating a subject that's based on that file and the comments that were provided and linking it to the patient. Any questions so far? All right, great. So I'm going to move on to the next example, which is processing a file. This time we're going to take a file and turn it into multiple subjects in memory, and we're not actually going to save the file to the database. We're just going to save the subjects that it creates to the database. So first of all, I'll demonstrate it. One thing about about this example is that anytime you're processing a file inside of the system, you're going to need that file to be in an agreed upon format. It's nearly impossible to process an arbitrary file. So, we have to decide beforehand when we're building our tool, what is the file going to look like that we're going to upload here? So in this case, I prepared this Excel file. It's got 3 columns, a medication name, a dosage, and then, some usage notes. So I'm going to upload this file here. Drag and drop, click OK. And you'll notice that some medications get created. Click on this medications link, and you can see something very similar to the Excel sheet that I just showed you. So how does this work? There's nothing interesting in the before script, but you'll notice that we're passing in, we have this medications file parameter available, right? That's what everything's going to be processed from. So we use this method, open spreadsheet file simple, which is a custom Limfinity method for processing either CSV or Excel files. The reason it's CSV or Excel is because typically the user does not know the difference between those two, and they would be uploading them, basically treating them as equivalent. So we want to be able to treat them as equivalent in code too. This method takes as an argument the path to a file. And briefly, let me talk about this. We're taking the file that was passed in, and we're calling these methods on it. This method.file takes the Limfinity file. We kind of use a class to abstract away certain things of the file. And that class has a method.file, which will give you the Ruby file. And the reason I'm specifically mentioning this is because Ruby file is a standard thing that you can use Google to look at, right? I mean, there's a file class right here. If you just search Ruby file, you can find all the documentation on this and all of its really nice methods that it has available for you already. And all you have to do is call .file on our file to get that, right? And .path is one of the methods that this file has, right? I mean, it's right here in the documentation. So you can, read all of that and understand how all of it works without even needing to understand anything about Limfinity, just understanding things about Ruby. And then all we're doing with that file is iterating over it, iterating over each row, and creating this subject patient medication from each one. Fairly straightforward. Any questions about this example? All right. Well, now we can move on to what is something, it's kind of like the opposite of the example we just looked at. What this tool will do is take data in the database, specifically the medications, and generate a file from them, and it will save that file to the chart file UDF. So I'll go ahead and click the button here. I realize that chart is not just a list of the patient's medications in real life, but in this demo system, good enough. Click OK, and you'll notice that my chart file gets replaced by a new file. And click on this, open it up, and you can see what it looks like. Basically just providing the same data that's in the database, but giving a short, translating that data into English sentences. How does this work? Fairly straightforward, just like the other examples. In the after script, we are taking the patient's medications, we are mapping them each into a string, and then we're joining those strings together to make one big string. A file is really, you can think about it as just one big string containing the data. So how do we, and then we also need to get the file name. And in order to do that, this is a fully qualified name, a name that includes a path. This path is a good place to put files in. This report.dir, this is kind of like a Ruby on Rails / Limfinity construct that gets you to a good directory for placing files into. It's good because you're guaranteed to have write access there. It's a very common Limfinity pattern to use this directory for putting files in. So that's the directory portion of our path. We also have the file name, which I want to talk about briefly. In this case, it ended up as generated chart Bob because that was my patient name. This actually needs to be unique. The reason it needs to be unique is because if multiple copies of this tool are running at the same time, you don't want them to collide and run into a race condition where they're both trying to process the same exact file and overwriting each other. So if you just use generated chart.txt for every single file that you made this way, if two users are running the tool at the exact same time, there could be errors. In this case, I've inserted the patient name. In a real system, that wouldn't be unique enough. You need to use the MRN or something like that. A very common Limfinity paradigm that you'll see is to use the current timestamp in the file's name in order to guarantee uniqueness. And then we're using a standard Ruby method. Once again, this can be looked up on the file class to write file to a given file name. Then we're opening, once again, using a standard Ruby method, the file and saving it into the Limfinity UDF. All right, any questions on this example? Great. I'll move on to downloading a file. This is nearly the same exact example as number 5, except that it presents this little download dialog for downloading the file directly. This can be handy if you have users who don't really know that they need to click here to get the file. You can instead present a button that just lets them download it straight from the system. The code for this example, up until line 7, it's exactly the same as our previous example. And then on line 8, instead of saving it to a UDF, we use the send file construct. And this is just a Limfinity construct for generating that little dialog that you saw. This is kind of the old way of showing a user a file, is to let them download it and let them open it using programs that are on their computer. More preferred in modern terms is to let them preview the file in the system. So that's what I'll be showing next. But this example is kind of still handy because sometimes you do end up with files that can't be previewed for whatever reason. So previewing a file in the system. First, let me just show you how it works. I'm going to click the button, and I can see the file directly inside the system. No need to download it. No need to open it using a program that I already have. It's just right here. This actually works using things that are built into your browser to render files. So the way this works here is we can provide a custom X type, a panel X type, and it's got HTML inside of it. It's got an iframe that renders the file using the subject ID of the subject in question and the property ID of the property that contains the file. This is kind of like another one of those canned examples where you can just kind of take this and run with it. You can mess around with the height of the panel a little bit to get it to render differently potentially. One important aspect of this is that it can be used to render PDFs inside the system. So that's very handy. Definitely used in the newest versions of lists, for instance, to render all of the PDFs directly in the system. All right, any questions on this example?
Okay. I have a quick question.
Sure.
I actually have a use case where I need to render PDFs. Is there anything else I would change there? Looks like you're doing it to JSON or something, but.
Well, this is using the custom fields construct in Limfinity, which, if you're not familiar, it lets you put fields on the form which are not specified in these parameters right here. And so I'm just putting in a custom field, which is just HTML, basically. It doesn't have a name value pair. It's just a HTML blob. Depending on what version of Limfinity you're working with, this example should just work out of the box.
Okay, got it. That makes more sense. I'll try it out. Thanks.
No problem. Okay, so then last example here, at least related to these patient, is emailing a chart, emailing a file. This example I can't show you because my demo system is not configured for emailing, but it's pretty straightforward. we use this. If you may already be familiar with the send email X or send email method. That's a standard Limfinity method for sending an email. If you're not already familiar, that is all documented in our documentation. And you can pass that method a block, and you can, inside that block, call the add attachment method. That method takes two arguments. One is a link directly to the file, and the other is the desired name of the file in the email. This may look a little complex, but basically I'm just taking the full file path using, once again, the standard Ruby methods for getting the path, and then I'm using a standard Ruby method. You can look up this base main method. All it does is chop off all of the path except for the file itself. So that gives me back basically the exact same file that we have in the system. You know, generated chart bob.txt is also what it would be called in the email. But if you wanted to say, you know, give all of your email attachments the same name, you can also do that. All right, and then our actual final example here is how to iterate over files, how we store files, and some other useful things. So first of all, what are we looking at here? This is actually a list of all the files on the disk on my local machine for Limfinity. So like this little Limfinity instance has these files in it attached to subjects, and this is the whole list of them. So what I want to show here is actually how we store files. They're stored in the attachments directory, and then they're stored in a directory which is based on the month and year they were uploaded. And then they're stored in a directory that's based on the subject they're attached to. And then they're stored, you know, obviously the file name has to be there too. So I mean, some of these files are coming from the demo we just did, and some of them are from my practicing this demo. But what's more interesting about this is how this is actually generated. If you ever do need to iterate over files on disk, you know, it's fairly rare that you do need to do this inside of the configuration. But sometimes there will be use cases, you know, before I've had to, you know, send all of one of our clients' PDF files to an external SFTP site. And rather than building that into the configuration, you know, I just went onto the server and ran some code to do it. And so this is kind of example of how that code works. Here we're using this dir construct, and this is another Ruby class. It's another standard object for working with a directory. It's got a ton of methods, and they're all well documented online. I'm going to be using the glob method, which basically just lets you get all the files in a particular path that's qualified with wildcards. Very handy. So basically what I'm doing here is I'm saying that I want all the files that are in the attachments directory, and then inside of that, any directory that starts with 20, you know, for 2020 or 2019 or whatever else is there, and then any directory, and then any file. So if you wanted to change this example to only show text files, for instance, you can easily do that, and you know, just adjust slightly how you're searching. This iterates over the file's names as strings. Then we have to use the standard Ruby method for opening the file. And then, once again, standard Ruby methods for spitting out the file's path and size. There's lots of other handy methods you can use too. You know, in my stated example of sending these over SFTP, you know, that's all standard Ruby stuff. No need to worry about anything Limfinity there. All right. Any questions on this example before I close the code? All right. I guess we can now open it up for general questions about this demo or any other questions you might have.
Hi, Jacob. This is Chandra. I had a question. Hi. I had a question from NIAD, and they were asking, remember that every time you open a reporter, like you wanted to print a report or something, that it gives you only CSV option, right? I know it's a framework, and if they click a tool and like to generate a report, and it shows up a dialog box, will there be, we can manipulate that? Yes, if you go into like that, yes. Yeah, that is, I know it's framework. So if you click one of that, so you see here you have only CSV option. But if you go into custom report where you have preview and then you can just, I think there is an option as a PDF. And so you can just say whether it's a PDF or there is somewhere we have that option. And so they were asking, is there any way that we can manipulate that, not the system one, if it's coming from a tool, and you can, in the before script or somewhere, that you can say, give an option to select the PDF.
You mean a PDF that would contain like something that looks like the General or Explorer report?
Yes.
So that could be done. It's possible to make a tool which does something very similar to the General report or Explorer report, the HTML version, right? You know, because you could save the General report as HTML.
Right.
And HTML can be written to PDF.
Okay.
So essentially, what you would do is you could, take the same like code snippets that we use to generate General and Explorer report, and then you could use the same type of PDF generation that we use internally, right? The WK HTML to PDF to turn that HTML into a PDF. That's probably the best way to take what you're getting from here and turn it into a PDF.
Okay, so I think that code snippet, that's the one probably might need to be able to, like if you create a tool to select a couple of subjects and then generate a report, then we need to know what that code snippet looks like, right?
Another suggestion that's way simpler would be to just generate the report as HTML and then save page as, and then you should, or well, maybe not save page as, but there ought to be probably a way somehow
saving that as a PDF,
save as an HTML, just using, or get it to save as a PDF just using their browser instead of using Limfinity code. I mean, that would be way simpler.
I know. I suggested that, but still, you know how they are.
Sure.
They wanted to know on the fly for the user to select. Okay, makes sense. So if you get a chance, then you could just send me what it looks like if you have to make it in the tool. That'd be great.
Right.
Thanks.
All right. Any other questions?
Hey, Jacob.
We have a question in the chat.
Oh, okay.
So Andrew asked what version of Ruby that you're using to develop limbs, and Vlad answered Ruby 2.7, and then Ruby on Rails was the next question. Do you mind taking that?
Probably would be best if Vlad did, actually. I don't know off the top of my head which version.
Well, Vlad said the latest of version 5, but Andrew asked, when do you use Ruby and when do you use Ruby on Rails?
Oh, I see. Well, a lot of times you're not really using Rails in Limfinity development. I mean, Ruby itself is used very commonly. All the code that you write as configuration code is in Ruby. You don't need to really know much about how Rails works or the methods that it provides to understand how to use Limfinity. The majority of that has been abstracted by the Limfinity, custom methods that we provide. So when do you use Rails? I'm even struggling to think of an example of when I used it in Limfinity configuration. I'm drawing a blank. I'm sure there's been some time, but it's very rare that you need a Rails construct.
Thanks, Jacob. Andrew, did that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you very much.
Sure.
No problem. And then somebody was speaking up just a minute ago.
Yeah, that's me. This is Ian Holder from GeneWiz, and I'm curious actually what what are the steps to sort of get somebody started with working in Limfinity? Because it looks like a really useful platform for us to start using in GeneWiz as well.
Yeah, so we have a set of like intro videos. I think Monica can probably try to help you get hooked up with those. Then the question would be, where are you working with Lymphinity? How are you setting it up? All that stuff. And that's a different question that we probably need to take offline.
Okay. Thank you.
But Ian, I'll send you the links to all the information. We have YouTube classes on Limfinity, and I'll send you those links.
Right.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
All right. Anyone else?
I have a question. This is Andrew. I work for UK Biocentre Milton Keynes, England. I'm quite new to LIMS, and I'll be interested to know a bit more about your is it the developer program? So you can teach me how to do it.
Sure. Were you already put in touch with Tom or Monica?
Yes.
I think actually, Andrew, Richard, you emailed me, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, Richard is, we were trying to figure out who would be the best contact for you. And Richard, who's in the UK, is going to be contacting you about that.
Right. Brilliant. Okay. I know Richard, so that's fine.
Oh, good. Oh, good. Perfect.
That's Richard Peck, is it?
Yes. Sorry, Richard Peck. Uh-huh.
Yeah, he's our LIMS contact. So that's good. Okay.
I don't think he's on this call.
No.
But yeah, Richard will be getting in touch with you about that for sure.
Brilliant. That's great. Thank you very much.
Sure. Thanks for asking.
Just while I got you on the line then, so the other thing that I would like to ask about is using the API. So I've tinkered around with it. Is there any kind of more comprehensive examples other than what's in the API user guide? If you click about and you go to Ruro.
Right. There aren't really any more comprehensive examples than that available. If you have a specific question, I can try to answer it in short order here, but.
Okay. So what I would like is if a sample ID is incorrect, I would like to use the API to then go in and change it rather than using the interface.
Right. Okay. So in that case, there is an edit subjects API. Is sample ID in your system, is that an UDF or is that like the actual ID of the subject?
I think it's the actual ID of the subject. I'll have to check. I'm not sure. I think they call it the root sample.
Right. If it's actually the ID of the subject, that changes things a little bit. I don't know if there's an actual existing API method for changing the ID of a subject, but any code can be arbitrarily executed via API by exposing it through a helper script. So I don't know if you're aware. Let me just share real quick. I'll share my instance again. And when you're creating a helper script, you can, click this little field right here, enable via API, and that is in the documentation how to use one of these, right? So you can use one of these to pass a parameter containing the new ID, and then if it can't be done through the existing API methods, you can, through code, change the subject's ID.
Okay. Oh, that's brilliant. Is there a sandbox environment that I can tinker with, or would I need to speak to Richard to get one? Because we've got live, we've got UAT in development, but
right?
Nothing where I can just kind of go and just have a play.
Sure. Yeah, I think that would be best as a question for Richard as well.
Okay. Good. I'll have to be nice to him.
Andrew, I'll reach out to Richard after this meeting and make sure he answers all your questions.
Perfect. That's brilliant. Okay, thank you very much.
Yep, I think we're at the end of our time, right, Monica?
Yes, 11:30. Yeah, thank you all so much for coming. We really appreciate all the great questions, and we hope you have a wonderful new year, and we'll look forward to seeing you next year. As Jacob said, if you have any ideas for topics that you're interested in for next year, please email Vlad, Jacob, or myself. I put our emails in the chat, and we look forward to hearing any feedback as well. Thank you so much. Have a very happy new year.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank
That'd be
you.
very
Bye.
interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you.